So again, in these first verses, it's not the day after the feast, even though that's the title of the chapter. And in the first 11 verses of chapter 8, we see this, again, this interchange between the woman caught in adultery and the men who accused her and brought her to Jesus and Jesus. And we see the wisdom of Christ in this story. They each went to his own house, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" This they said to test him, that they might... What's that? This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has anyone condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more." So, the Pharisees were out to trap Jesus. They wanted to kill him, but they needed to have some sort of charge to bring against him. So they've already when he was at the Feast of Tabernacles, they've already stated their desire to kill him. But here he is again at whatever point at the temple, and we're not sure exactly what he was doing, but he continued to do that. He continued to appear in public, even though the Pharisees wanted to kill him. He wasn't going to stop doing what God had called him to do just because they didn't like it and just because they had it out for him. So they bring to him this test. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" This they said to him to test him, to trap him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. So Jesus is faced with this conundrum, with this problem, because there's a woman who was caught in the very act of adultery. She is guilty. She doesn't deny that. So we, according to the law, the letter of the law, she should have been stoned to death. Here's the problem. If he says, "Okay, go ahead and stone her," as I told you yesterday, stoning wasn't very popular then, but it also would go against his entire mission, right? Of mercy, of grace. And now he's throwing the letter of the law at this woman. But he'd be upholding the Mosaic law. If he says don't stone her, then they could charge him with not upholding the Mosaic law. So the Pharisees thought they had him trapped. They didn't care about justice. They cared about getting Jesus out of the way. The woman was just a pawn in their scheme. But it didn't work out the way they wanted it to. In his answer, Jesus says this. They said this to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. So Jesus shows his divine wisdom here. He didn't say anything at first, and we don't know what he wrote or why he wrote, but we do know what he said. And remember, this is happening in front of an audience. So Jesus is publicly refusing to stone this woman. And obviously, those who were there knew what he was writing in the dirt. So in his answer, he shows respect to the law. Does he say, "Don't stone her"? No, he says they can if they're without sin, not sinless. If they did not participate in this sin, which they likely did, they likely said, and if they've never committed adultery themselves, because if they've committed adultery, what should happen to them? They should be stoned. So he upholds the law in this. But at the same time, he shows the hypocrisy of the leaders. Jesus knew that they had set her up. Jesus knew the sins they had committed. And if he was writing their sins in the dirt, now everybody knew the sins they had committed. So he reveals their hypocrisy. You want to stone this woman, but you want to continue living in your sin. We're that way sometimes, aren't we? I know I am. I want to do what I want to do, but I sure want to call you out for your sin. I don't want to be called out for mine. And we're all that way sometimes. So Jesus' wisdom is on display. And then the shame. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. So instead of trapping Jesus, Jesus trapped them, and they had to walk away. The first to leave were the older ones. Why do you think they were?
Because they were wiser and they kind of realized what was happening.
Hopefully they're wiser. And they realized that they've been bested by Jesus. Sometimes I think younger people are continue to fight a battle, even knowing they're wrong. I think I've told you about the time that I broke my mother's cassette tape recorder, and I put it back in her closet, broken. And she brought it to me and accused me of breaking it. And do you think I confessed? Of course I didn't. I was 14 years old, 15 years old. I said, "You always blame me," right? Good deflection, Amy. But you know why she always blamed me? Because it always was me. Because it always was me. Yeah. It was never any of my other sisters. It was always me. And so I think they maybe were a little bit wiser, a little less combative. They realized that they weren't going to get anywhere. So moving on here, we see the ignorance of the Pharisees. Now, listen, this is going to be pretty harsh on the Pharisees, which I'm not opposed to being harsh on the Pharisees. They were pretty clueless sometimes. But it's also going to be harsh on people who don't know Jesus, and that bothers me a little bit. So I'm going to tone that part down a little bit. So in this long conversation in verses 8:12 to 52. And this now we are possibly the day after the feast or not long after the feast. Certainly Jesus is in Jerusalem. We know that. Jesus is going to attempt to reveal who he is, that he is Messiah, that he is God. And of course, for their part, the Pharisees, the Jews, are going to push back against that. So in these verses, 8:13 through 52, we see this wisdom of Jesus, this gentleness of Jesus, contrasted with the ignorance and the harshness of the Pharisees. And we see it every time they speak to him. In verses 12 and 13, we see the ignorance of Christ's truthfulness. They don't know who he is. They don't know that what he's saying is the truth. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So the Pharisees said to him, you are bearing witness about yourself. Your testimony is not true. Now, first of all, I want you to see that this is another I am statement in John. Ego, I, me. I am Yahweh. Yahweh, the light of the world. So he is making another claim to deity. And so he's bearing truth about who he is. And they're saying, you can't testify to yourself. So they accuse him of lying, saying that he can't bear testimony about himself. He can't say he's Messiah. But we've already heard from Jesus that he's not alone in saying he's Messiah. The Father has testified to his Messiahship. His works, his miracles testify to his Messiahship. To his deity. So they are ignorant of that. They have ignorance of who his Father is. Verse 19 says this. They said to him, therefore, where is your Father? Jesus answered, you know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. Now, the curriculum says that they knew who Jesus' father was, and they're talking about Joseph. But they aren't saying that. They're saying, where is your father? Show us your father, basically. Maybe they knew that Joseph was Jesus' father, but I doubt it. It could be. But Joseph was probably dead by this time anyway. We don't hear about Joseph after Jesus was 12 years old. So he probably wasn't around. But they don't realize the father, whoever they thought his father was, they did think he was talking about his earthly father. They did think that Jesus was talking about his earthly father. And he's not, obviously. He's talking about God. So once more, they reveal their ignorance. In verse 27, it says they did not understand that he had been speaking to them about the Father, about God the Father. And then at this point, in verse 20, John interjects. I don't think I put it up there. Yeah, I did put it up there. He interjects where he is when he's saying these things. It says that he was in the treasury of the temple. So in order for you to understand the situation and that how was he able to get away, I'm going to give you a few. They put more pictures than are necessary in here, but an idea of where he is in the temple. So this is the whole Temple Mount here, and you see different places. That's the actual temple structure. The Temple Mount is everything within those within that big outside wall, but the actual temple was in the middle of all of this stuff. And there are several gates that led into the temple. If first you had to go through the east gate, and then into the Gate Beautiful, and then into the Nicanor gate to get to the actual temple. The Gentile court was the huge area where anyone could come. Jews, Gentiles, no matter who you were, you could come that far. If you were a Gentile, you could go no further. The women's court, ladies. The women's court is where both men and women could go, but women could go, Jewish men and women could go to the women's court. Women could go no farther than the women's court. Now, the priest's court could only be entered by priests. So if you were a Jewish male and you were not a priest, you could not enter the priest's court. That's where the sacrifices took place. And then there's the altar. And this here is the treasury. Now look at all that around you. He's cornered in there. And yet he was able to get away. Because it wasn't his time. It wasn't time. When the time comes for him to be arrested, he will turn himself over. He'll say, I'm here. Leave my disciples alone. Arrest me. but it is not time yet for that. So, was that a miracle? It doesn't expressly say it, but it possibly was. So we'll stop there, and we'll pick up here tomorrow. Hopefully we'll finish this up and you'll take your quiz.